So hi, I'm Karen Marie Yust, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's session. We have two of our colleagues who will be presenting this evening, Anwa and Lauren. And the way that we're going to organize our session tonight is Anwa will present first, and then we're going to take a 2-minute pause. And during that 2-minute pause, we'd like you to jot down either in the chat or for yourself the thoughts or questions or issues that you come to mind out of listening to her presentation. Then we're going to move into Lauren's presentation. She'll offer her summary of her paper, and we'll take another 2-minute pause to jot down for yourself or in the chat some thoughts and questions and issues. And then we'll open things for discussion with regard to both papers. One of the reasons for the jotting is to take a pause and let you think about what you've heard, and everyone gets a chance to do that without trying to, figure out what somebody else is saying in that moment. And it's also a chance to see if we might have some overlapping issues, questions, and concerns that we can then try to address as a group as a way to involve more people in participation. So without further ado, Anwa, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you share my screen at the full side? Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this section. I would like to share with you my paper, Spiritual Intelligence, a Vision for Religious Education that foster a just learning community. People long for a model of education that fostered a communal setting where teachers and learners are co-learners to study, to challenge, interchange, and grow. Thích Nhất Hạnh, and you can see his picture here, a spiritual leader, and I quote him here: when people find wisdom as a living stream and not as an icon to be preserved in a museum, they can transmit their wisdom to future generations. I explore the role of spirituality in religious education, focusing on spiritual intelligence as a vital way of knowing that expand the notion of epistemology to include the knowledge of the heart. Spiritual intelligence foster the ethical aspect of interconnectedness to promote a sense of belonging for learners. I argue that spiritual intelligence is a pathway to wisdom that enables a just learning environment embedded in interbeing beyond koinonia in Christianity and Sangha in Buddhism. I envision religious education using spiritual intelligence as an approach to foster a shared vision beyond the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. And I will have 5 things to do. First, spiritual crisis in education, and then addressing that crisis with spiritual intelligence. The third part focus on koinonia and Sangha, a communal way of being, and then learning community and a shared vision beyond Micah 6:8. And then I have some questions for discussion. First, the spiritual crisis in education. I encountered a tragedy in 2021 when a college student, let's just call her Leah. She was the first-year student at Yale University, died by suicide at the age of 18. I imagine why and how Leah lost the joy of studying and chose to end her life at a tragic way out. She lost her purpose in studying at this Ivy League school due to a spiritual crisis of being and belonging. An education that does not promote learners' well-being had failed to fulfill its task. In Leah's case, who is responsible for her death? Herself, her family, her friends, or Yale universities. None of these options could offer the correct answer. According to Yale Alumni Magazine, after Leah's suicide, Yale took action to resolve the ongoing demand of students seeking counseling by the creation of 14 new full-time counseling positions, including 8 with the office in or near residential colleges. This response by the institution is crucial, but I think inadequate. All learners have a right to thrive, not just to survive in education, and their well-being are the test of education. To accompany learners facing spiritual crisis, or to accompany those search for the true sense of self, to pursue a meaningful way of being must be main priority. Learners face the obstacle of isolation and alienation, which can cause tremendous harm. The colonial mode education pushed learners to foster assimilation and competition to meet the standard designed by the colonial system. And you can see the 2 pictures I present here. So if we religious educators call forth learners to form a beloved community instead of just to foster an isolated place or a competitive environment, we failed our students. If we want to help students, there is a call for us. Western educational practices, rationalism, competition, assimilation, isolation, and often exclusion. And this way of teaching and learning creates a vague sense of community, where educational instructions are a safe place for some, but not for others. Consequently, teachers and learners confront a spiritual crisis of belonging, especially not being a part of a healthy environment that fosters holistic growth in mind, body, spirit. Can you imagine how Leah's teacher feel after her tragedy? They also face a spiritual crisis. So all human beings have a spiritual desire to find an ultimate purpose, be aware of ultimate value, search for deeper meaning in life, and long for a sense of fulfillment, core experience that we can learn from spiritual intelligence. And I envision spiritual intelligence are used distinctly in education. And I will move to the second part, how spiritual intelligence help us to address this crisis. So what is spiritual intelligence? This is a form of intelligence that enables a better understanding of the inner self and creates more profound meaning for both the individual and community. As you can see here, there are so many core values of spiritual intelligence. For the limitation of this space and time, I can only focus on wisdom, sense of community, and connectedness. Spiritual intelligence enable people to have a balanced life, to take action, to achieve, and to share what they learn with others, teaching learners deeper understanding of spirituality through the notion of love, leads them to embrace remarkable human capacity for empathy, compassion, which sometimes reason and science alone cannot prove or explain. And one of the scholars, her name is Dorothy Cooke, she an educator, proposed way to develop and nurture spiritual in education, following Parker Palmer's view of teaching spirituality using connectedness as a significant theme in disciplines such as history, physics, and psychology. So it's not just us religious educators can practice this, but something here can tell us that the theme of connectedness is so important. And according to Cooke, lack of spiritual intelligence impact everyone, but the real price paid is in education, with a lack of interest or effort to meet the needs of children and youth whose spiritual intelligence is neither recognized nor developed. So I also explore the spiritual intelligence as an act of acquiring wisdom through spiritual maturity and samadhi. So you can see through the screen spiritual maturity as a status that enables teachers and learners to embrace the beauty of connectedness, to share wisdom. And then that also inspire them to have a desire, first a desire and then a will to create a safe and just learning community. Parallel to spiritual maturity, in the Buddhist doctrine, we have the other idea called samadhi. According to Thich Nhat Hanh, samadhi is the power to keep insight alive in every moment, as a continuity of knowledge of the heart that moves people to act. Reflecting on spiritual intelligence in the context of education and interbeing, the primary purpose of education, especially religious education, is to cultivate good people. How do you define people as good people? I put that in the context of healthy relationships based on collective vision and value. The idea of interbeing expresses one of the beauties of the global South, those who come from communal orientation, communal bonds, and they also foster the collective values in a crisis of meaning and belonging in education. People need a model for both teachers and learners to embrace the notion of human as social, spiritual, and collective beings. How do we do that? How do we help learners to learn that school is not a place to compete for top honors? And how do we help students to see school is a place to find a sense of being and belonging? So in order to do that, we teachers need to learn first, and then we can share meditation, self-awareness, and discernment. We have a call to accompany learners to join in the mystical journey of humanity toward each other and toward the ultimate truth. And this vision encourages all future religious educators to embrace spiritual intelligence in their teaching. When learners are trained to search for truth, and this truth enlightens their thinkings and living, to draw close to God and draw close to their community. The next section, I will focus on the communal way of being. I can see through different pictures here. One of the pictures is a sister in my community. The other is from the African school and one from Vatican. So reflecting on the idea of koinonia. What is koinonia? This is a community of sharing. One of the beauty of koinonia is the joyfully contributed gifts and sharing. And to establish a beloved community, I propose a gathering is the first action to be taken. Parallel in the Buddhist tradition, we have the model called Sangha. So Sangha, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, is community where should be harmony and peace and understanding. That is something created by our daily life together. If love is there in the community, if we've been nourished by the harmony in the community, then we will never move away from love. And can we do that to help our students? The communal values following koinonia and Sangha can contribute to education. And the next section, I will focus on the book Micah chapter 6, verse 8. This is what the God requires you to do, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. if this is a vision that I encourage you to be with me. So my vision and your vision can become one, and that make our vision works. Spiritual intelligence is a pathway to expand epistemology through the heart knowledge. This is the time for us just to take the concept of wisdom from the East in the community-based well-being. Koinonia and Sangha show teachers and learners how to develop an educational model as a just and loving community. The most crucial theme of spiritual intelligence, interacting with Micah chapter 6, verse 8, calls us to plant the seed of love, justice, humility in learners, first in us and then in our learners, our students, our younger generations within a just learning community. This vision enable us to grow holistically and to attain the ability to act with wisdom and care, even in challenging situations. Now is the time to cultivate and nurture these seeds. Now is the time to build a beloved community, to offer a healthy learning environment. To have spiritual intelligence needs time and effort and needs mentor. Are you ready for that position? We need that personally and institutionally. Spiritual intelligence is a communal wisdom that impacts communal being and agency. With that in mind, I invite you just to close your eyes, turn off your screen if you want to take some moment with me to practice the act, to open the door of our heart. You can take some deep breath to calm your heart, to calm your mind, and to surrender. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in, be mindful of who you are. Breathe in, be mindful of who our ancestors are. Be grateful for this community. And be grateful for this gathering. Give yourself a beautiful smile and also give one another a beautiful smile to encourage each other, to offer love, compassion, harmony, so many things that spiritual intelligence can help you to open your heart, to embrace the heart knowledge into your being, teachings, and learning. And I will end our meditation here for the sake of time. And sorry for cut that a little bit short. And I have some question for you to reflect on. And I know we have more time after another presentation. So I will copy that and put in the chat room for you. Thank you for coming to this presentation. And I love to have any feedback and question from you. Thank you.
So as I indicated earlier, we're going to take 2 minutes for people to post things in the chat, questions, comments, thoughts, issues, or to make notes to yourself about things that you want to be able to hold on to. And then we'll move after those 2 minutes to the next presentation. But please take 2 minutes to reflect on what Anwa has shared. Thank you for taking a pause to reflect. And Lauren, I invite you now to present.
Hi, friends. My name is Lauren Calvin Cooke from Emory University. And I want to start by thanking Anhua for that fantastic presentation and also for giving us the opportunity to practice mindfulness. I thought that was such a wonderful way to actually put into practice what you were talking about. So I really appreciated that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Is this working? Yeah, cool. Okay, so my paper today is going to, sorry. Oh, okay, sorry about that. So my paper today deals with two main questions. First, what is wisdom? And second, how do we teach for wisdom? I've been exploring both of these questions for a few years now as I've worked on my dissertation research. And it seems particularly relevant to the conference theme this year of becoming good ancestors. Wisdom is a concept that we often associate with ancestors, with elders, with people who have more life experience than we do. It's something that we often equate with advice, like, let me share some wisdom with you. So it's common to think of wisdom as what is known, the lessons learned, the insights derived, and the advice shared from life experience or from divine revelation. But the way that I've come to conceive of wisdom is not so much content or what is known, but a way of knowing, an orientation toward the pursuit of deeper understanding. Wisdom, as I define it, is an integrative approach to knowledge that values both cognitive and affective ways of knowing, and that is characterized by a love for learning and a desire for understanding. Wisdom enables us to consider the meaning and implications of ideas and events, helping us see clearly to navigate complex situations in ways that lead to wholeness and flourishing. I wish that I could unpack all of that. I cannot, nor could I in the paper. But if you are interested in further aspects of that definition, I'm happy to expound on that or to send you the longer document that this comes from. So wisdom is not static content that can be imparted. It is a way of engaging knowledge that must be cultivated. To talk about wisdom as something that is imparted implies that learners don't have any wisdom until someone else gives it to them, which is an assumption that naturally leads educators toward direct instruction models, or what Paulo Freire referred to as the banking model of education, in which the teacher deposits information into the minds of students. But the banking model actually stifles wisdom by discouraging creativity, curiosity, and critical thought, and by deadening students' love for learning. And so if we want to become good ancestors, I think we have to reframe our understanding of what wisdom is and how we educate for wisdom. I think our legacy needs to be one not of giving advice or telling our students what to do or what to think or how to live, but a legacy of helping students develop their own resources of wisdom. So this is why I say that wisdom isn't something to impart, but to cultivate. To talk about cultivating wisdom assumes that learners have resources within themselves that can thrive if their environment nurtures growth. This understanding of wisdom requires a different approach to education, one that values the learner's own capacity for wisdom and facilitates their own engagement with knowledge instead of just giving them information. So the role of the educator who wants to educate for wisdom is not to do the thinking for students, but instead to create invitations and craft learning environments where learners engage knowledge for themselves. As Robert J. Sternberg and Emily S. Hagen write, then, pedagogy for cultivating wisdom should not didactically convey information about wisdom, but rather encourage students to experience various cognitive and affective processes that underlie wise decision-making. The cognitive processes to which Sternberg and Hagen refer include skills like logic and reasoning, critical analysis, developing salient questions, considering processes of cause and effect, skills that help learners effectively assess situations and their implications for others. Affective processes include skills like empathy, imagination, contemplation, and openness, skills that help learners see issues from different angles and imagine ways of responding that promote flourishing. So in my paper, I suggest 5 pedagogical practices for cultivating wisdom that invite students to experience and practice the cognitive and affective processes that comprise wisdom. And these 5 practices are playfulness, unhurried attentiveness, wonder and curiosity, reflection, and dialogue. So the first practice of wisdom is playfulness. Playfulness cultivates wisdom by helping students think differently and use their imaginations. So as a wisdom cultivating pedagogical practice, playfulness is more than just having fun or playing games. It is about engaging material in creative ways without predetermined outcomes, which opens students up to new ways of knowing. So I'll unpack three aspects of this definition. First, playfulness is about engaging material. It's not a distraction from or a warm up to the quote real teaching, but it's the mode in which the content itself is engaged. Second, playfulness is open-ended without predetermined outcomes. It should invite creativity rather than conformity. In a lot of youth curriculum, which is my particular area of research, play is just a warm-up activity, and it leads to a single conclusion. It's often an illustration that reinforces the main point of the lesson. But this kind of play can't cultivate wisdom because it doesn't invite students to think for themselves, which leads to the third part of this definition. Playfulness invites new ways of knowing. It helps us see reality differently and envision new possibilities. Courtney Goto theorizes play as revelatory experiencing and learning, as these moments of new insight that allow us to catch a glimpse of an alternate reality, of what might be. And that insight can transform our own reality, helping us work toward a future where everyone can flourish, which is the end goal of wisdom. In practical terms, I think that improv exercises like Theater of the Oppressed or bibliodrama are fantastic ways to deeply engage content in playful ways, and help students see things in new ways and imagine alternative possibilities. The second practice of wisdom is deep and unhurried attentiveness. If we want to be wise, we have to pay attention to what the world wants to teach us. Unhurriedness and attentiveness go hand in hand, but they each require something different of us. Unhurriedness requires that we slow down, and that we focus on the quality of knowledge over quantity. So instead of rushing to cover material, the practice of wisdom dwells with the object of inquiry, seeing the time spent in contemplation as being valuable in and of itself. As educators, I feel like we are always dealing with the tension of breadth versus depth. How much material do we cover and how deeply do we cover it? And so I don't mean that we never have a broad scope, but I do think that we need to be more open to periods of silence and contemplation, viewing it as valuable for wisdom cultivation instead of a waste of time. Attentiveness requires that we be fully present, undivided, and undistracted. Because we're often so hurried, multitasking and trying to be on time, we often don't notice the wonders waiting for our attention. And here I think children tend to be a little bit more inclined to wisdom than adults as they take the time to marvel at the mundane. There are ways to teach students to slow down and pay attention. I particularly remember once at the Martin Luther King Jr. Museum here in Atlanta when, shocked at how quickly my youth group were running through the rooms, I was like, wait, hold on, we have to do this differently. And so I assigned them to find one object to stare at for 30 whole seconds. And just this brief exercise led to some fascinating conversations about details like the lipstick stains on Coretta Scott King's veil, and other details that they would never have noticed, but for unhurried attentiveness. But what I think is even more important than assigning unhurried attentiveness is our ability to model it in our teaching. So are we comfortable with silence? Do we find value in admiring details for their own sake, even if there's no takeaway or like clear insight from it? Are we willing to dwell with off-topic questions? The third practice of wisdom is wonder and curiosity. Wonder and curiosity are key for wisdom because wisdom desires and pursues deeper understanding. So the two, wonder and curiosity, are related. They both evoke a desire for knowledge and draw a learner toward deeper engagement with the object of inquiry. Curiosity tends to be more cognitive, while wonder is more affective. Curiosity can be developed by encouraging students to, and teaching them how to, ask questions. Asking questions is, again, a skill that seems to come naturally to children, but is lost in adolescence because it isn't encouraged in standard educational models. If you're not familiar with the question formulation technique, this is a great way to teach students how to ask questions. Wonder is kind of a more complex and diffuse concept. It can arise both from experiences of marvel and admiration, and from experiences of disorientation or bewilderment or even fear. But whether we're experiencing it positively or negatively, a mark of wonder is that it draws the learner in to engage the object of wonder more deeply. So wonder is more difficult than curiosity to cultivate, but educators can facilitate encounters with knowledge that create the conditions for wonder. And here, unhurried attentiveness can help to provide opportunities for wonder. Yannis Hadzogogiou suggests that we can educate towards wonder by, quote, starting with the richness of an object or phenomenon, like a tree leaf or a waterfall or a flash of lightning, through attentive observation, and by letting these things speak to us. We can also cultivate wonder through disorientation by presenting students with ambiguity, paradox, and tension, and giving them material to puzzle over. The fourth practice of wisdom is reflection. Reflection is how we process and make meaning of events, phenomena, and ideas. And it's key for wisdom because instead of just letting life happen to us, the wise person considers the meaning and implications of and relationships between and among ideas. And that's what gives us the resources to navigate new situations in thoughtful ways. In its more cognitive aspect, reflection is the intentional and disciplined processing and analysis of these events and ideas. In its more affective aspect, it involves contemplation through meditation or artistic engagement. And as educators, we invite students to reflect on kind of these three categories: events, phenomena, and ideas. Reflection on events, which is often autobiographical reflection, is the type of reflection that's most often discussed in literature on wisdom. And this is more than just reminiscing on a good memory. It seeks meaning in an event, considering questions like how a life event relates to what came before and after it, what insight can be gained from the experience, and in theological terms, how God may or may not have been present in the experience. And here, Dory Baker's method of girlfriend theology is an excellent example of theological autobiographical reflection. Second, we reflect on phenomena, both natural and social, or the relationship between the two. In the book of Proverbs, which is wisdom literature, after all, natural and social phenomena are often connected, as the Proverbs make analogies about human life based on observation of nature. Social phenomena, particularly complex social problems or systemic injustices, also require careful reflection and analysis. For this kind of reflection, David White suggests the but why method, in which the educator keeps asking the students, but why? And in response to their answer, but why? So why did Rosa Parks' feet hurt? Okay, but why were there racist policies in place? But why did white people see Black people as inferior? And this is from his book, Practicing Discernment with Youth. This method helps to uncover proximate and ultimate causes of any given social phenomenon. And finally, we reflect on ideas and concepts, where they came from, what assumptions drive them, how they cohere with our experience, and what their implications are for real people. The last practice of wisdom is dialogue. Wisdom is found in the intersection and mutual exchange and even tension between different life experiences and viewpoints. Dialogue helps to cultivate wisdom both in the affective and cognitive spheres. Its affective value lies in its ability to foster empathy and understanding for others. Because when we understand what is at stake for other people, we're more able to make compassionate choices. The cognitive value of dialogue is the way that it nuances and challenges our thinking, goading us to think critically. It is important to note, though, that wisdom cultivating dialogue doesn't just mean discussion. In most youth curriculum, for example, discussion questions are usually just about, the comprehension and application of the teacher's point. Like playfulness, dialogue has to be open-ended to be able to cultivate wisdom. But when dialogue helps a group explore an issue more deeply, it helps to cultivate wisdom in students. So these 5 practices of wisdom weave in and around one another, sometimes nearly indistinguishable from each other. Playfulness requires us to have a sense of wonder and curiosity, which arises from unhurried attentiveness. Wonder leads us to reflection. Curiosity can lead us into dialogue. And dialogue can be a playful enterprise that invites us to further wonder and reflection. So each of these practices weaves in and around one another, and they're also cultivating the desire for deeper engagement and further learning, which is a key characteristic of wisdom. So together, these 5 practices, playfulness, unhurried attentiveness, wonder and curiosity, reflection and dialogue, constitute a pedagogical approach that helps students experience the modes of thinking, or the cognitive and affective processes that both characterize wisdom and continue to cultivate it. And if we want to become good ancestors who pass on wisdom to the next generation, I think it has to be by teaching in ways that invite students to tap into their own resources of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And as we did before, we'll take 2 minutes now for each person to reflect and to note thoughts and questions and issues for themselves or through the chat for all to be able to attend to. So 2 minutes of reflection. All right. So now is the time when we open the floor for conversation about both of the papers. It might be helpful as we're moving into that space and seeing comments in the chat to think about if there are some who might want to comment on what they see as intersections between these 2 papers to begin our conversation. So feel free to drop that in the chat or to raise a hand, and I'll unmute yourself and to speak to the group, whichever you prefer. There's a comment from Zheng Shu that might be a space of intersection in the chat. He says, I think that one of the characteristics that the person with wisdom might show is to live with the problems or issues unsolved, not necessarily seeking to find the answer, not even slowly. So I wonder how such a wisdom can be taught or integrated in your pedagogy of wisdom. And it seems to me that that question also might apply to the notion of spiritual intelligence as well. So Lauren, Anwa, thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of wisdom is living with ambiguity. And also there's the sense of epistemic humility that's really important for wisdom too, right? That very few of us would think someone is wise who thinks they know everything. And so there's a sense of knowing what you don't know and being willing to live without the answers, like you said. As far as a pedagogy that reflects that, I think that in unhurried attentiveness and reflection, what you're seeking is not necessarily answers. And this is something I get at, I think, a little bit more in the paper about the difference between curiosity and wonder, is that curiosity is about seeking answers to your questions, whereas wonder is a little bit more wondering and wandering for its own sake, rather than trying to resolve or answer something. But as far as specific pedagogical practices, I'd have to think on that. But that's a wonderful question. Thank you so much.
Anwa?
Yes, like I give the case of Leah as an example. So I think the idea of having a supporting community is so important. And Thích Nhất Hạnh also share with us that Buddhists have 3 things: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That is 3 precious jewels in Buddhism. However, he thinks the most importance of this is Sangha, community. And sometimes a good teacher is important, but our learners need friends like brothers and sisters in practice. So sometimes they cannot share with us, but we encourage them to have a peer group, like mentor for one another. And The communal value help us to see sometimes I am struggling, but if I share, the problem is still there, but less and less. And then finally, with time pass by, I don't think we have to have a miracle healing right away. Time sleep us that healing, but a community is a necessary and essential condition. That's what I recommend.
I see some other comments that might be connected. One from Jennifer Ayers that says, directed to Lauren, says, thanks, Lauren. Your project is making me think differently about our theme. How might we think about young people as a kind of ancestor, teaching us a different way of being wise? And then Aisha Edwards, in response to Anwa's, one of Anwa's questions, I think, says, I view helping others cultivate wisdom as a deep exchange of understanding, experience, etc., among ourselves, i.e., all current generations in all directions. Children behold wisdom too, to be then passed on to future generations. I wonder what the two of you might say about the ways in which those who are young, our children, our adolescents, might be the wise ones who act as ancestors to those of us who have the more conventional ancestor role.
Anwa, would you like to give it a go?
Let me try. The idea come to me now is your idea, Lauren, the art of playfulness. I think children can teach us this. They can enjoy the flower that sometimes we forgot, that beauty around us. And I think Montessori method also help us to see in each child already have the potential to have spiritual intelligence. So the seed is there. We don't have to plant the seed from the beginning. God already put that desire, put that intelligence in each child. However, they can teach us, but also we can cultivate in them. And the idea of young people, they can become our ancestors. I think in my ministry to do youth ministry, I learned so much from them. Last week, I have a retreat for confirmation group. And the way they share touched my heart. They just said, I took a field trip to Uganda, and how to be with the people, to touch that culture, helped me just to see sometimes I have to surrender. I live in a very fast pace. So now it's time for me just to take deep breath, to enjoy my life. And that I learned from 17 years old group. Thank you.
So I have too many thoughts about this because my dissertation is on cultivating wisdom in youth specifically. So I'll try not to get up on my soapbox about it. But I think, so a short answer would be, I definitely think that young people have the capacity for wisdom for a few reasons. First, because I don't think that wisdom is strictly cognitive. There are aspects that are more affective and intuitive, and I think that's important. Also, one of my least favorite things is when people talk about how the insight of a young person sparks wise insight for them, but they don't consider the young person wise who provided the insight. Drives me crazy. So I definitely think that children and young people can be wise, but I do want to be careful not to romanticize that all children and youth are inherently wise and then they lose that wisdom as they get old and crusty or whatever. Because I think that not all young people are wise, but I think that they have the capacity for wisdom. And so I want to think of wisdom as something that that is available to all of us. But I also, yeah, like I said, I want to be careful that we're not saying, oh, young people themselves embody wisdom or anything like that. So.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Dean Blevins has put in the chat, I do wonder if wisdom is essentially an intellectual virtue reflective of an individual or an aspect of community interpersonal relationship. Can, quote, one be wise apart from a particular type of community? It would seem the interplay between communities that need wise persons but wise persons needing certain communities would be an interesting exploration. Thoughts on that from Lauren or Anwea or anyone else in the group?
It's a fantastic question. I haven't thought much about it, but I think Ann Hua's paper gets at that really well with community. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I think not just me, but a scholar in spiritual intelligence. I hope I pronounce her word correctly. Cindy Wickleworth. She mentioned about the 21 skills to have higher quotation of spiritual intelligence, and not just from individual, but first we need to achieve the self-mastery and the self-awareness. And from that we move to universal mastery and universal awareness. And I think James Fowler also help us to see the higher level, a desire to have the skill to serve, to give back to the community. So it will not be helpful if I am just own that intelligence for myself and without giving back. That will not be I think the ultimate goal of spiritual intelligence. So both for you and your community.
And I'm violating the guideline as a tech person. I am not supposed to do this, but the Dean's question also brings me a question. Either of you, both of you, the Dean's question that makes me think the difference between Sophia and Prognosis, because often wisdom that we use from the Bible is Sophia, but the other concept, Prognosis, is a communal, fluid, embodied knowledge. So there is no singular way we can define it, and it's because it's also fluid. So it concept itself refused to be defined in an essentialized way. So so communal and individual cannot be separated in this Prognosis concept of wisdom. So I wonder whether this can be something then that can be a bridge. I know, Mayan, you wrote something about Prognosis in your chapters about leadership over Asian American women.
A bit of a
It's right from my memory. It's intentional unknowing at this point. Sorry.
I appreciate the point you raised, Bo Young Lo. Maybe thoughts will come to people as they go along in terms of do we have to make so strong a distinction between the individual and community in that way? Peter, who's tending a baby at the moment, so can't speak up, says, Anwea and/or Lauren, what might wisdom offer as a means of addressing spiritual crisis? Or put differently, how much might wisdom be a marker of spiritual quality, the spiritual quotient? SQ.
I was actually wondering about this too, because there are so many points of connection between Ann Hua's work and my own that I was struck by as I was reading it. And so, of course, as the one whose paper was on wisdom, I was looking for mentions of wisdom in your work. And you say that people with a high SQ act with wisdom. And then in your abstract, you say that spiritual intelligence is a pathway to wisdom. But we're both talking about heart knowledge and interconnectedness and well-being and seeing clearly. And so I kept wondering, like, if in fact we were talking about kind of the same thing. And so I have not done any work in spiritual intelligence. And so I was wondering, from your perspective in spiritual intelligence literature and in your own thinking, like, what do you see as the relationship between spiritual intelligence and wisdom?
As I know so far, wisdom also is a core experience or a core value of spiritual intelligence. When Peter asked about how my wisdom offers as a means of addressing spiritual crisis. When we talk about this crisis, this is a way of being. Sometimes we try too much or focus so much on doing. I define myself based on my doing, but spiritual intelligence helps us to explore myself from within. And then from that, also have another foundation for me based on a community. So wisdom helped me to find meaning and also helped me to define my being. So as a way, I agree with you, Peter, as your marker of spiritual intelligence. Thank you.
We're starting to see some comments about public life and how this might be relevant to, connected to public life in the chat. Most recently from Nguyen. These papers offer a powerful project for public life, the cultivation of communal spiritual intelligence and wisdom praxis for the justice-loving well-being of all. And earlier, I think it was Peter was saying how the SQ in public theology connects with the discussion in one of the student gatherings this week on religious education scholars working outside the academy, including work in corporations about spirituality and what it means to be a spiritual person. And I had put a note in much earlier about the extension of the model into public theology arenas beyond religious communities and into social media web-based venues. I wonder how the two of you see this moving sort of outside of religious education classrooms or congregational youth groups, sort of religious communities, to a way of the religious interacting in the public realm with perhaps those who are not religiously affiliated. How do you, is this extendable?
I also ask myself the same question when I do ministry with family and with parents. I ask them this question: are you identifying yourself as the one have spiritual intelligence? And they ask, what is that? And I share a little bit. And then one I said, oh, I don't think I have that, because I focus so much on earning money, doing a lot of things, and even lack of time to spend with my children. So I think even just some conversation with a ministry group that I have a chance to encounter, just ask a question about this kind of intelligence. And even at Boston College, when I encounter someone, I ask them a question: do you know about spiritual intelligence? Even students at the divinity school, they said, oh, they have not heard about that. They heard about emotional intelligence, but this could be the first time they might encounter that. So I appreciate any idea that helped me to dig deeper into this project. And for me, it's not just for me, but like Dr. Trần Cô Mai Anh just said, the cultivation of communal spiritual intelligence. And I think this is important for us today. There are too much division. There are too much hate. And sometimes if we bring God right away, they may reject it. But if we bring something that can connect first, the truth, the spiritual intelligence can be an instrument. Thank you.
I kind of think that wisdom has to move outside of the religious education classroom and outside of the church into the public sphere, because the end of wisdom is promotion of human flourishing, and so I think it's really important that it goes out into the public square. Well, I'm trying to think of what else I want to say. There's a lot to be said about wisdom and flourishing, but I think that the ability to consider the meaning and implications of ideas and events and situations is really important, especially in the political sphere, when we have so many complex social problems that we need to be engaging in dialogue, and we need to be thinking about where these situations and ideas originated and where they're leading us and what are their implications for other people and not just for ourselves. And so I think these skills of wisdom can help us there in the public square. Wisdom is an important part of, I would say, probably most, if not all, religious traditions, but it's also a secular concept that psychologists and neuroscientists and personality theorists are talking about. And so in that sense, yes, I think wisdom is, the end goal of wisdom is to promote flourishing for the whole world and not just in the isolated bubble of our religious communities.
Mark, you have your hand up. Would you like to join in?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thank you, Lauren and Anhua. I'm listening to earlier part of this conversation about, I think I was getting the sense of when we're talking about children wisdom, and I would probably venture to say also spiritual intelligence. It sounded like there's this innate, or whatever the particle or whatever the gene is, that we have this wisdom in ourselves. And I'm also wondering, though, is like, we use the language of cultivation in this conversation right now too. So where I'm going with this is, on the one hand, we are laying this out like theoretically, these are the different pieces to this, but wisdom and spiritual intelligence to me is a lot, it's more than these things. It's like, it's not just techne that somebody can say, oh, these are the 5 steps or the 5 areas, and I can just kind of work on this, and then I'm all of a sudden wise, or I'm spiritually intelligent. And so I guess I would like to hear from you all, where is that? Is it a sense of time? But it's not even a sense of time. And we know people who have done this technically for a long time, and still I wouldn't necessarily call wise or spiritually intelligent. There's a deeper level to this that I'm would like to kind of hear what maybe your thoughts are. First of all, would you agree with this? And then second of all, what are some of your thoughts with this?
Let me try my best just to think about the idea that I learned. I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh when he explained the experience of mindfulness. So mindfulness, he also think that we can see kind of wisdom here. And he said mindfulness is just to see something at its ease, or to approach a person as that person is, not as a binary subject-object, but subject. And also this kind of wisdom help us to move beyond notion to experience. So I experience the beauty of the flower, and the flower in the idea of interconnectedness. It's not just a flower itself. I can see the sun. It needs the sun to shine through it. It needs humans' hand to take care of it. And look at that. And I think every single thing, I just take a flower as an example, but every single thing in our daily practice can help us to take some deep breath, just to pay that attentively, intentionally, just to, like Lauren said, the unhurried attentiveness of wisdom that can help us to see things not as a notion, but experience. So I think this needs time to practice. None of us were born with that innate skills that we can reach into that high level. Now, I am a religious sister, and we have different way of doing contemplation. And sometimes if we just recite whatever the community offers, it is easy. Then the other level is to reflect on what we read, reflect on what we see. And then another level called real contemplation. We are there without controlling, without, like Lauren said, the art of playful in not to predetermine the outcomes, the art of meditation, just to enjoy time and space here and now. So I hope I can answer some of your question, Mark.
I think as educators, it's really difficult to make anything happen and ensure that we get the result that we're looking for, right? And so I can't say positively that these pedagogical practices will make a wise young person by the time they graduate high school. I can't say that. But I do think that we can't force it to happen. But in all teaching, we want to create invitations and craft these learning environments in which it can happen for students who are willing to do the work. And then also with my definition of wisdom, I think the attitude and approach to knowledge and one's teachability is a good starting point. And I think that's more important than any of the content that is learned. And so I think that an attitude of teachability is more innate in some than in others, but I also think that we can encourage that, because I see that in standard educational models, we're deadening students' love for learning. We're keeping them from thinking critically. And so it stands to reason that we can open up these capacities through our pedagogy as well. And we can we can invite them to experience learning in a way that brings them to love it. And that helps them move into a more teachable spirit, I guess, and loving learning and seeking that understanding.
Are there others who want to raise questions or make comments on the many ways we've been addressing these topics over the last half hour or so? You're welcome to raise a hand and speak out or put things in the chat. Let's see. Mayan has said, both of your papers are pointing to a way of life, a way of being in the world, and not just particular ways of knowing. It is perhaps not about determining the qualifications or markers of spiritual intelligence or wisdom. Perhaps we could wonder what conditions would make possible for this kind of ontological shift. And then Karen Marie's comment just anticipated what I'm trying to write here.
I feel like that's tough when you're trying to work with learning objectives, right? I think you're right. And yet we also have this sense in which we're trying to come up with some sort of qualification or marker, some way to quantify what it is that we're doing or to assess whether we have achieved our educational goal. And so this is something that I've been wrestling with the whole time.
And I also think when Cô Mai Anh said it's not a particular ways of knowing, right away I think about the word knowing in biblical tradition. Knowing here is like God knows us, not just the knowledge of our mind, but the act. And I also think about when Abraham knows Sarah and they have a child. That's also the act of being. And I also, when we get through the knowing from the heart, we move from knowing to feel it. And then the feeling that we have for others, people, for a story that motivates us to do something. Like I shared earlier, when we have students, just to see the interconnectedness that help them to have a desire to serve humanity, like the knowing of the heart inspire the act. So like praxis, instead of just theory, I think about praxis, including both theory and then practical way to put them together into an act. So thank you, Cô Mai Anh, for a very good question and good comments.
There's still more time. Anyone who's not yet had an opportunity to contribute a comment or a question, now would be a great time to jump in. I'm going to wait one more minute before deciding that perhaps we're tired and done for the evening. So again, one more invitation. Let's see.
I do have one bit of insight that I gained. I'm sorry, the storm is over, so I'm gonna try to turn on my camera. Before I understood wisdom, you know, just a few months ago, that it was gained, and it's something that you acquired through enhancing your knowledge. And Lauren reminded me that that is kind of how I understood wisdom before, that it's imparted or infused in some type of way, but only to certain people. And then one of the concepts that dawned on me was wisdom and knowledge is kind of like fishing. You get a knowledge of fishing and someone teaches you how to fish, but the more you do it, the more experience you have with it, then you start learning the weather patterns. And today they're going to be biting because it's raining in this area. The temperature of the water is better here. And so that's like a wisdom you gain from continuous experience of just a little bit of knowledge of this is how you fish. But the more you do it over and over and over, and that repetition brings about that wisdom of, I know when to fish. I should go at night in this area. Oh, and when I'm in this area, I need to go out into the deep versus staying in the shallow, or I need to go on this side versus that side. And that wisdom can only be gained from the experience of keep using your knowledge over and over and over. And so just knowing that you still have to tap into the knowledge to even gain the wisdom and the experience of it, and constantly practicing those things over and over in different ways, and maybe even from different people. And it made it clear to me when people say, you know, if I give you a fish, you eat for a day, but if I teach you how to fish, you eat for the rest of your life. And that's because that wisdom that comes with fishing is gained through and helping you to be able to eat for the rest of your life. And I see us teaching in that way. You know, we teach over and over and over, but our teaching experiences are different, and we gain wisdom of teaching through the current consistent practice of imparting knowledge to others.
Kimberly, thanks. That's really helpful, I think, and that helps us. This analogy of fishing helps us to see wisdom as this ongoing practice. And I think we also tend to think of people as being wise, like, oh, they've made it, like they've arrived. They're elderly, and wisdom, according to Erickson, is like the crown of, you know, the previous developmental stages, all of that. But wisdom, I don't think, is something that we ever arrive at. It's something that we practice daily. And this is why in Proverbs, it talks about how if you rebuke a wise person, they'll love you. Well, what are we rebuking a wise person for? Aren't they doing everything right? Well, no. And so there's the sense in which the wise person is constantly open, again, to learning and growth, and constantly seeking new understanding. And so I do think it is this ongoing practice of life, like you were talking about. So thank you.
I just would love to share with you what I learned from the earlier section of the No Void video. That just give me the energy to see the indigenous community. And also so many sections of this conference talk about shared story, shared memory. So I think wisdom in that context, it needs to be the broadened thought. We need to bring other cultures in. I read the book by Bonaventure de South Santos, and he said so long that the knowledge from the global south have been ignored. And this is now a time for us to see why we want to be a happy person, not just like the man, the one who is so competitive. I want to be a happy teacher. Then my students, my learners can have that joy too. So how we can bring that in the context of shared story, share memory, the idea of dialogue, in exchange knowledge, and that we need to bring more cultures in, do more ethnographic research, do more documentaries to bring wisdom, the wisdom that not just based on the Western world to define, but we also need to see people, to see the notion, to see the thing not as a notion, but as our experience. And we cannot do that if we don't jump into their world and to experience their wisdom. Yeah, thank you.
I'll note that the last few discussion pieces that we've had have mentioned story or narrative in some way. And I know both papers also speak to that a little bit. In a similar way, our filling out our evaluation forms for this session is a way we tell a little bit of our story of this conference and help to create a different kind of understanding of how this meeting should continue to evolve. So I've noticed that Boyoung has put the link in for the evaluation form. So I'll just note that now. Now's a great time to click on that so you have it at hand. So as soon as we close, you can go in and do it. And then Lauren, I see you responded to a comment that Aisha had made. Perhaps you want to speak to that aloud as people are clicking their evaluation link so that they'll be ready to do that when we close.
Sure.
Just informed that sorry, I was informed that I posted a wrong link. So let me do it again. Sorry.
Yeah,
No.
all right, great. If you do click the first one, you just have to pick breakout session and then it'll give you the drop-down menu and you can find the session too.
Thank you both so much. So yeah, so Aisha was saying that she thinks young people's natural wisdom can manifest itself in different ways, and they sometimes give us clues as to how they possess wisdom. And in my dissertation, because I'm talking about wisdom in youth, like I have a whole section talking about like, okay, can young people be wise and why might adults not see wisdom in young people? And one of the reasons that I think adults don't see wisdom in young people is because wisdom scholars are all adults. Adults are basing their judgments about whether young people can be wise on their own understandings of what wisdom is. And I think that young people may understand wisdom differently or value different aspects of it than adults do. And so there's a study that was done. It wasn't extensive, but in participants' autobiographical experiences of wisdom. So they were talking about decisions they had made that they themselves considered to be wise. Young people described their wise decisions more in terms of empathy than other aspects of wisdom like self-determination or knowledge. And so I thought that was interesting. So young people themselves may consider an interpersonal skill like empathy as being more integral to wisdom than one's like internal thought processes or the quantity of knowledge or life experience. And so they may actually be a little bit more attuned to the ethical dimension of wisdom than adults are. So anyways, that's, yeah. So anyway, thank you for that question/comment, Aisha.
So perhaps we need an adolescent's ways of knowing book to parallel women's ways of knowing and raise questions about these psychosocial types that are out there. All right, Boyoung's given us the more direct link to this session evaluation, and it is getting late in our time. So I'll give again a minute to see if there's anyone who wants to jump in with a last comment, or if you want to make comments in chat to our presenters in thanks, and then we'll plan to conclude. But 1 minute for any last thoughts. All right, then let us thank our presenters. And thank you all for your persistence in a long day of sessions, whatever times it might be. I know some people in the middle of the night even there. And see you tomorrow or next year, hopefully in person. Take care.